All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. In today's episode, we are talking through a very important consideration for high altitude mountaineers. And that is to ensure you are doing everything you can to get enough fueling for your endeavor. So let me tell you more on what this is all about. Now, when we go up to a high altitude, whether you are going on a mountaineering expedition or literally just a holiday, undereating is really, really common. Now, this can happen for a few reasons. Number one, when we're at high altitude, we will burn a lot more calories. For any exercise, any movement we do, we will be burning more calories than we do at sea level. Even just sitting around doing nothing, we will naturally be burning more calories. Now, this also gets combined with the factor that often when we're at high altitude, our appetite will get suppressed, meaning our hunger signals are not quite as strong, meaning we're not going to eat quite as much food. And even though the body wants more energy than usual, our appetite is less than usual, and it ends up being a bit of a mismatch. And then number three, just to sort of add to all of that, as food choices available at high altitude are often not incredibly desirable. Depending what type of expedition you're doing, depending on where you are in the world, you may sort of be in a situation where you're like, well, I don't have access to a bunch of other things. I've got a bunch of non-perishable food or whatever it may be. Alternatively, I may be somewhere, around the world where you're like, well, I'm at base camp and the food sucks here. It's horrible. It's awful or whatever it is. And these different factors all together end up being we undereat, we underfuel, and we typically don't eat enough that the body wants. Now, the issue here is if we are undereating and underfueling and having that associated weight loss where we are losing weight, we're losing muscle mass and all of that, this can be a factor which can lead to reductions in exercise performance, can reduce mental clarity, produce early fatigue, early exhaustion, ruin your mood, make you feel rubbish, and it's just not much fun. Now, if you're on a shorter term expedition, if you're just doing a day or two or three or whatever it may be, it's probably not a big deal. It may affect your energy to a degree, but it's not the end of the world. But if you are on something that's a little bit longer, this can actually be a major detriment to your chance of enjoyment and just having a good time, and also success. So it's definitely something you want to think about. It's definitely something you want to prepare for, and it's definitely something you want to put a little bit of attention into to give yourself the best chance possible of minimizing this. Now, the reason I say minimizing this as opposed to avoiding this is because even if you put a huge amount of thought and attention here, undereating at altitude and underfueling, it's pretty much unavoidable. It's going to happen to almost everyone. Now, there's quite a few studies on this sort of phenomenon, I can never say that word, out there. And I've read through quite a few. And realistically, the only studies I've ever seen out there where people have completely avoided altitude-related weight loss for something that's a little bit more extended have either involved military, like soldiers, who were forced to eat a certain amount of calories per day. So someone was standing over them and forcing them to eat and reminding them and making them happen. They maintained their weight. But there were also people in that study, soldiers, who were left to their own devices, and they ended up undereating because they didn't have someone standing over them, reminding them, or whatever it may be. On top of that, the other ones I've seen is like people who've been provided with regular, energy-dense, easy-to-eat liquid calories. So like smoothies or whatever, and stuff that's just jam-packed with calories, which they force down, which are a little bit easier to eat. But obviously, that's not super practical for a lot of people out there, and super accessible for most mountaineers. Aside from those ones, pretty much everything I've seen is people just lose weight to one extent or another. So when we're looking at this, we want to minimize this as much as we can. It's probably expected we are going to lose some weight, and we're probably expected we're going to undereat, and we just want to minimize this as much as we can. But it definitely does take a bit of thought. Now, obviously, the way I was thinking about approaching this topic, and there's so many different ways we can go about it because there's so many different types of mountaineering out there. There's so many different expeditions, so many different levels of high altitude. There's so many people on different lengths and different logistics and this and that. So I'm going to keep it relatively simple, but a few things you definitely want to consider. At the most basic level, and this is common sense, but it needs to be said and you need to remind yourself of this. At the most basic level, make sure you eat at every meal. Now, I've heard so many stories from mountaineers who are going up on expeditions where their meals get provided or they bring their own or whatever it may be. They have a rough time, they have a terrible time. And one of the main things they said was like, I just didn't feel like eating, so I didn't eat anything. And then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. At the most basic level, make sure you're eating at every meal. You may not feel like it. You may not have a huge amount of appetite, but make something happen. Even if you're just having a little bit and you're not having a full meal, it's something you need to pay attention to. And it's something you need to remind yourself. Because at the end of the day, you may be having your dinner and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm freezing. I'm tired. I've had a rough day. And you look at your food and you're like, oh, I just don't want to eat that. I don't want to touch that. But it's something you want to pay attention to. Number 2, and this can definitely help with number 1 and also help with everything else, is definitely make sure you bring a range of energy-dense and delicious foods that you can snack on. Now, one of the most basic tenets in regards to helping your energy on any type of long-term endeavor is making sure you are complementing your meals with regular snacking. Making sure you are complementing your energy with regular snacking. You're regularly topping up your fuel stores. Whether you're a low-altitude hiker or a high-altitude mountaineer, that is really, really valuable. Now, when we're at this high altitude, this gets even more important because, as we said before, your appetite will be low. We want to be making sure our snacks are something that tastes good. So even if we have a really low appetite, we just do not feel like it, we can get it down. And we also want to make sure they're calorie dense. They're easy to digest. So they're not going to sit in your stomach. They're going to give you plenty of fuel. And obviously, they're not going to weigh too much as well in your pack. So you want to really, really think about this and bring whatever you need. Chocolates, sweets, crackers, jerky, I don't know, whatever. Like there are 1,000,001 snacks out there, but you want to think what is delicious to you, what has quite a bit of caloric density, and obviously what's going to be practical for your expedition. So don't be there bringing things that are super heavy or it's going to go off or whatever it may be. On top of that, when we're at high altitude, we want to consider making sure we have a mix of both sweet and savory. Because a known phenomenon, and again that word, is at high altitude, sometimes our taste preferences will change. So you'll get to high altitude, you may be a person who loves sweet, and you get up there and you're like, you know what? I don't want sweet, I just want savory. Or maybe it's the opposite, or whatever it is. So make sure you have a combination. Sweet, savory, often I recommend bringing some spicy or some sour or whatever it is. So whatever mood strikes you, there is something there. Very, very, very simple, but it goes a long way. And again, just as with the meals, set yourself a reminder system. How are you going to remind yourself to snack? Are you going to have a buddy system and like every hour or so, you're like, hey, let's pull something out? Are you going to sort of like make sure every single stop you just munch on something? What are you going to do? Have a reminder system to get it into you. Next up, you probably want to consider some type of calorie-dense liquid supplement. Now, as I sort of said previously, in one of the studies that we saw of people maintaining their weight, they were kind of really, really, really leaning in the liquid calorie-dense foods. And I think in that particular study, it was more smoothies. Obviously, smoothies aren't super practical for most mountaineers out there, but the idea behind liquid calories is liquid calories are typically easier to digest. They're typically easier for you to consume when you're not feeling particularly hungry, and they don't sit in the stomach too long or quite as long because they're liquid. So considering some calorie-dense liquid supplements for your time at high altitude can be a really good option, where you can just get easy calories in while you're moving, while you don't feel like you really want to eat so much, just to complement what foods and what snacks you're having. So probably the most simple option looking here is electrolyte supplements. Now, electrolyte supplements are great for mountaineers or any type of endurance athletes for a bunch of reasons. In this particular context, electrolyte supplements, which has a high amount of carbohydrates, can be an easy way of you getting that food in. Definitely recommend that. If you are in the situation where you're, for one reason or another, deciding you don't want carbs or whatever it may be, maybe this might not be an option for you, but for anyone else, I would definitely lean towards it. And then you could probably consider, there are other options where maybe if you're aware that, look, I go up at high altitude, I don't really like dinner and I do struggle with this, then you may consider, okay, maybe I can bring some high-calorie hot chocolates or something like that. Bring that sort of chocolate powder where you can load up a little bit of that at night, have a nice warm drink, but get some extra calories in there. A bunch of different options there you can consider. If you are on longer expeditions, again, it's probably worthwhile considering in the same vein of bringing some type of protein supplementation, and easiest is probably a protein powder, purely for the fact that, protein up at high altitude on expeditions is usually the sort of harder macronutrient to access because we don't have access to meat so much or whatever may be. So protein is very, very important for preventing loss of muscle when we're up at high altitude or at any type of time. So having a supplement on these expeditions, probably useful. Having protein powder as a liquid, again, can ease your stomach. You can force yourself. You can combine that with, say, the hot chocolate, or combine that with some high calorie stuff or whatever it may be. That can be a decent option. Now, obviously, around all of this, I'm just kind of spitballing some main ideas for you and some main considerations. Make sure you eat your meals. Make sure you're snacking around meals. Try your best to get some liquid calories to complement things. And maybe fill a gap with some protein powder. It's all pretty basic stuff. But obviously, the practicalities of how you apply this is going to depend on, what type of expedition you are, where you are in the world, and this and that. For example, if you are in a different country, are you going to have access to certain things? Do you have to bring that with you overseas? And can you get certain snacks and certain foods into certain countries? Need to be aware about that. On different expeditions, are you doing your own nutrition? Are you planning this all out yourself and figuring all this out? Or are you going on an expedition with provided meals where you may not have a huge amount of control around the meals that you eat, but maybe you're going to build that out with, your snacking and your extras or whatever it may be. Obviously, if you're going into more extreme environments, cold or extreme altitude or whatever it may be, the practicality of all of this, of eating it all and literally getting food in and taking your gloves off or getting off your oxygen mask if you're using oxygen or whatever it may be, becomes a factor. There's a lot of practical application of all of this, which obviously changes from person to person. But as a general rule of thumb, the important information I want you to take out of this is at high altitude, you're probably going to undereat. The more we can minimize this, the better. So you want to give yourself the best chance possible of making sure you're doing what you can here. So just keep in mind when you're thinking about this, you are probably going to undereat. But we want to minimize this as much as we can. Pre-plan how you can go about this. Come up with as many ideas around how you can work around lack of appetite, how you can work around lack of access, how you can get calories in during your movement and outside of that when you're actually in camp or in base camp or whatever it may be. And then on top of that, have a think about fallback plans. If you don't feel like your dinner, what are you going to do? If you don't feel like your sweet snacks, what are you going to do? If it's too cold for you to actually access your snacks, or if your certain snacks are frozen, what are you going to do? Have a think about as many fallback plans as you can. And finally, set up a reminder system to help. Come up with some way where you can prompt yourself to make sure this happens. Come up with a buddy system, set yourself a little reminder, write a note for yourself, whatever it may be, whatever you think will work for you, but set that system in place. This is all very, very, I guess, almost basic stuff, and a lot of people will know this kind of intellectually already, but the application of this, time and time again, I've seen from mountaineers, it sometimes slips through the gaps. So put a bit of thought to this, put a bit of attention to this, and I promise you, it will go a long way. And the final thing I completely forgot to mention before, it's probably not the final thing, but I need to say it, is if you are planning on bringing any snacks, or if you are using any type of supplement, whether it's protein powder, whether it's electrolyte supplements, whether it's, what did we say before, anything else like the hot chocolate, whatever it may be, you want to practice this during your training. You want to see how the body responds to this type of stuff. So on your training hikes, on your longer cardio days, practice whatever snacks you're using, practice that electrolyte stuff. For the hot chocolate, if you're going to use it, have that at home, see how the body likes it. Make sure you're not introducing anything new, because gastro is a whole different story, or upset stomach is a whole different story. And that's another factor which will affect how much you're eating if your stomach isn't behaving itself. So make sure you test everything out as well, and don't be one of those horror stories. But all in all, I hope that makes sense. I hope it's just a good reminder for a few people, and maybe just gives you that little kick in the bum to put a bit more thought and attention into this to make sure it doesn't slip through the cracks. Because I promise you, this tiny, simple area can make such a massive difference to your performance, to your comfort, to your mood, and ultimately your chance of success and having a great memory for whatever your expedition is. So with that being said, I'm going to stop going on about this subject. I hope it makes sense. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye.